So, following from the last video, what we're going to get on today is get these core plugs out. Now, I call them core plugs because that's what I've always known them as, but they're also called frost plugs. Now, the idea of these is if for whatever reason your coolant mixture inside the block isn't correct, or you live in Canada where it's very cold, water turns to ice, as we know, and when it turns to ice it expands. So what can happen inside the block, if you didn't have these are your weak points. So if they weren't there and for whatever reason the coolant inside your engine froze and expanded, it will just crack the block. So what they have done for years is have these inside there. So at the point of expansion, when your ice has expanded to the point it's going to, these dislodge themselves. They're only thin tin and they pop out. They can also pop out if you've overheated the car a lot. You've got a lot of heat distortion around the area. They can pop out. Now, they look quite nice from the front, as you can see them. They're all silver, they're clean. But these are about, I don't know, £1 each, £1.50, something like that. Now, I want these out because I don't know what contamination is behind these or what's been in the coolant way. And as we know, this engine hasn't been left in the best conditions. Hey ho, it is what it is. What I'm going to do is pull these out and see what's behind them. If it's all clear, fine, that's good. I can put some new ones back in once the block gets painted. But what we also can do, if these have got corrosion on the back, you can't see it. So they look nice from the front. You can have one of these that's highly corroded on the back and is weak in that metal to the point that it'll quite easily pop out at any point it feels the need to jump out. So best to pop them out. Easy way of doing this, I do it, hammer, screwdriver, and all we do, put it in one side of it, there you go, simple pop the screwdriver, and you've turned it around, and all we do is just lever it out. There you go, there's that. And what you can see from the back, it's not too corroded, that's just your general staining really from the coolant. So that didn't take any pressure to pull out or knock out, so that goes to show how easy they are to come out to save the block. Now these are very easy to put back in. What some people do is put it in a hole and get a socket that fits inside there. If I'll get one that fits that size, yeah, there you go, that looks like it fits perfect. Knock it in. That's the wrong way to do it, because what you're doing, you're pushing that in. These are an interference fit, which means they interfere with that gap, so they're pressed in. And what you can do, if you hammer that socket in there, if that socket's not the right size, as you can see, that wobbles around. What you'll end up doing when you hammer it in is these sides will bend down that way. So as you're putting it in, it will go and bend round, which means they will not seal properly. So best thing to do is when you're putting them in, see what socket we've got. There you go, that's closer, and that's a better way to do it. So you've got a socket that is the same outside diameter. So when you're knocking it in, you're pushing it in on this outer race, which means it will push in nice and square. So that's those. So again, they're a couple of quid to change. I can see behind there, yeah, it's not highly corroded. That's just the inside of the coolant ways. But again, look, you've got, I'll take a picture inside there. It is full of crud, which is only moved out by my fingers and stuff. So it's a good way to get those out, and I can just clean out the inside there with a bit of cleaner and toothbrush just to get all the orifices that you can't get to as normal way cleaned out. So that's all three of those knocked out. And if we just look inside, so you see all those lumpy bits down the back of there, they're already in there. So what you don't want is stuff like that floating around a nice clean cooling system, because that stuff will end up getting stuck in your water pump around the pulley. It can also go into the thermostat, get stuck in between there and end up blocking that. So we just plop those out. Looks fine in there apart from some dirt, so we'll just clean it out. Again, nothing but staining, but a few bits. So we'll just clean those out. Bit of cleaner in there, and then that'll be those done. That's those cleaned out and all the big particles going out of the way. It's still stained in there, but we're not worried about staining. We just want the bigger particles out of the way. It's one good idea to keep a core plug as well, because there's various different sizes, so keep it. I've stuck one in the box a bit, so I know when to replace them. I can measure it and get the right size. So now we move on to cam followers. Right, so what we do, little walkthrough, talk through of cam followers. Now these are hydraulic cam followers found in 16 valve engines and are pretty unique to most modern engines. So this is a hydraulic cam follower. Gone are the days where it was your tappets, where you would adjust them naturally, valve clearances and stuff. This does it on its own. So with the valve closed, you have a cam sitting on top of here, one of your cam lobes, and oil pressure comes from the head into this gallery around here and then goes through a hole inside there. Now oil doesn't just lubricate, it also acts as a shock absorber and helps transfer heat away. So that's your bearing surface. When you've got oil pressure, that helps lubricate this follower because it moves up and down the head as the cam pushes it down. So what it then does, with the valve closed, oil goes in this orifice and goes inside here, which you can't see. So what we've done, these are getting replaced, and I'll explain why in a minute. So the oil comes through that hole, that little one there, and fills up the cavity in the back of here. And you can see there's a clean ring around there. That ring marries up with the top of this piston. Now this piston stays on there with constant pressure via the spring and the other part of that top hat which sits on the actual valve. Now as you can see, there's another little indent in there which allows the oil pressure to go in around this cavity and through here, which then in turn fills up the back of this. Now this is filled with oil pressure. Now also that little circle there is a tiny ball joint. Ball joint? It's not a ball joint, definitely not a ball joint. That's a tiny ball bearing, which has an even smaller hole, 3 little tiny slits around here. So when the oil pressure, again with the valve closed, comes in here, fills up the back of this, it then comes through here and fills up the space that sits in the rear of here. Now what that does, it has X amount of oil pressure in it with the valve closed. As soon as the valve opens, this cam follower moves down away from the oil coming from the cylinder head. So is therefore all this oil passage is closed and locked at the whatever pressure was inside it. So that's frozen there. There's no more oil pressure coming in or out, which means it's a hydraulic lock. So oil's not going up or down pressure in there because it's stuck, and it's inside this and inside that. Now what that then does, relevant to this spring pressure and the oil pressure of the engine and its design, it holds that sat on top of the valve stem at a set given tolerance. So there is no valve, no valve clearing issues. You've always got contact with the cam straight through the cam follower and on top of the valve stem, keeping a constant pressure all the time. So there's no issues with engines being hot and engines being cold, different types of oil, different temperatures of oil. It'll always have one constant even pressure on top of the valve when it opens and closes. And what you do note, the reason I bin these, you can probably clean them, but this orifice in here is so small, it doesn't take any amount of particles to block it up. Again, when you push that little ball bearing, what I've done, I've left this drain out on that cardboard, so you can see some dirt in it in a minute. But what I'll do, this spring sits inside there. That goes in there, like so. And these are a machined fit, which means they fit perfectly together and seal. So as soon as it's in there, you've got spring pressure on that. But what you can do is, remembering that the top of that is always in constant pressure with the top of that. So I've pushed this down, there's pressure on there, and what I'm going to do, you can see it coming through there you go. That's the ball bearing moving, letting any oil pressure that was in between this and this come back up. and as I said, that is a tiny, minuscule little gap. So what you're left with here, I can't see any metallic particles, but you can see on this left hand side here, these larger particles. You've got two there, there's another one over there. Now these are quite large. They will get a build up inside these tiny parts, and they will eventually block up the orifices inside this housing. And if they get blocked up, or even partially blocked, you're not getting sufficient oil through in the correct path, which means your valve clearance is going to suffer on one of them. Now, some people say you can sort of clean to a degree. I mean, this one I can't even push it, and again inside there it's just spring pressure, so I should be able to push that down and overcome the ball bearing that's inside there, like we've just demonstrated, and the oil should come back out the orifice hole. Now I'm putting quite a lot of pressure on that, and it's not moving, so straight away that shows me something's wrong inside there. That should move. This one did. This one probably sprung down, so that one's not moving. This is another one. That one's not moving. That one moves a little bit. So again, you've got multiple different ones. Some have got movement, some haven't. That could be down to God knows what's gone inside there. And like I say, these are not expensive, but it's something I would recommend changing. Again, it's up to you. Decent brand, again, INA, a general good brand. So what you don't want is, you can put them back in and reuse them, but you are then running the risk of particles getting from the oil system inside there and blocking these up. So I thought I'd take one apart and just show the inside of them, because I always learn. You can read as much as you want, but unless you actually physically get your hands on something and understand how something works, it makes a lot more sense. So that is a cam follower and how they work. So hope that was helpful to someone. What we'll get next is move on to the cam timer. What I'll probably do is a separate video on the cam timer, because it can get quite intrusive.